Zion Williamson is one of the most hyped basketball players of all time. He became an internet sensation in high school, went to Duke where he had the greatest statistical season in the history of college basketball, was drafted #1 overall by the New Orleans Pelicans, where in the nearly 50 games he has played thus far, he has averaged 23 points on 63% true shooting in just 30 minutes a game on average, which is 27 points per game per 36. Doing this as a 19 and 20-year-old. When Zion came in the league, his first season was electrifying. Literally anything the guy did ended up on Bleacher Report or SportsCenter. The league was shoving this guy down people's throats. The Pelicans had more nationally televised games than many better teams, just so people could see Zion in action. But then the 2020 season came to a close for the Pelicans, and in the 2021 season, Zion has been better than his rookie season. So you would think that the hype train would just keep on chugging, right? Well, no, it hasn't, to a pretty insane degree. But this video, though it might not seem like it, is not about Zion Williamson. Trust me, I'll talk about him plenty, but this video is about hype, why it comes and goes, how volatile it is, and whether or not basing expectations around hype is something that people should be doing. And just in general, explore every single angle of hype. Welcome to NBA Deep Dive. Before we dive into this one, about half of the people that watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you fall into that 50%, please subscribe because it allows you to see these videos in your sub box, and it also helps my ego. Also, in the last deep dive that I did, I asked if you could beat the previous amount of likes of the first deep dive in this series, and y'all did. In fact, you did it in amazing fashion. 10,000 likes on a video with 90,000 views, which is pretty fucking nuts. So I want to see if you guys can do that again. Can this video get 10,000 likes? I would really appreciate it if you helped me reach that goal. Anyways, on with the video. To understand hype with Zion as the main example, first we must understand how much hype Zion Williamson had. It's genuinely comical how good Zion was in high school. Like, the phrase man amongst boys doesn't even work here, because a man amongst boys could not do what Zion was doing to these poor kids in high school. This was an animal amongst boys, a monster amongst boys. Imagine a guy with the size, athleticism, and strength to body Rudy fucking Gobert, and then put him on the court with a bunch of 5'6" skinny kids who just got out of algebra class. It was comically unfair. Zion averaged 36 points per game in his senior season. His mixtapes were all over YouTube. He was the #1 recruit in the country, which led to him taking a scholarship offer from the Duke Blue Devils. And in college, he averaged 22 points and 9 rebounds on an absurd 70% true shooting. And after losing to Michigan State, he declared for the draft, where he went #1 overall to the New Orleans Pelicans. Which honestly might have been the first step in Zion's hype dying just a tad bit, especially in the long run. Like, I'm sorry, Pelicans fans, but when it was announced that the Pelicans would get the #1 overall pick, 99% of people's reactions to that was yuck. And I almost want to be sorry for you Pelicans fans, but at the same time, you kind of don't have the right to be mad. Your team's fucking mascot is a pelican. Like, this thing's name is Pierre, and it looks like it drives a dirty white unmarked van. And not only that, y'all have a second mascot, which is... what the fuck even is this? Jesus Christ. Anyway, Zion is now a Pelican, and him coming to a team fresh off of the Anthony Davis trade, there was considerable hype because, relatively speaking, there was some solid talent on this team outside of just Zion. Unfortunately, though, Zion had an injury which made him miss the first 44 games of his career, which honestly builds even more hype because once Zion was finally able to play, it was like, damn, finally, we got to see this. And Zion immediately put on a show, which would help build even more hype.
Here's a lob to Zion, and he finishes over DeRozan.
Elliott coming in for him right here.
Here's Zion for three. Hit it again. Back pulling the trigger and hitting a three. And Hurdle blocked it. Zion gets it back and finishes.
After this game, as the year went on, Zion had more and more great moments, incredible highlights. It seemed like whenever he breathed, Bleacher Report would post him. Like, people started calling it Zion Report because of how much they were posting him. But injury as well as Zion's shape kind of halted him from really breaking out in his rookie year, leading to him playing just 24 games, averaging 28 minutes a game. But this did not stop Zion from putting up crazy numbers: 22.5 points per game on 61% true shooting. And remember, this is in 28 minutes per game. Per 36, that is 29 points per game, and on that efficiency, at that amount of scoring, that's basically the same numbers as MVP Giannis. And just a reminder, we're talking about a 19-year-old here. The Pelican season comes to a close. Next season comes around, and Zion continues to kill it. This season, he's up to 24 points per game on better efficiency, getting more minutes. And this was the response to that. Which, like, what? Don't get me wrong, Zion has not been so much better than he was last year, but he has been a little bit better. But more importantly than that, he only played 24 games in his rookie year. It's not like people had their fill on Zion, or at least they shouldn't have. There should be plenty of desire to see more from Zion Williamson, and yet there isn't. A good amount of people have actually talked about Zion's lack of hype lately. B-Souls and a Funky Diabetic made a video about it, but they really just talked about the specific example of Zion, and I will do that as well just in a second here, but I also want to focus on how hype rises and falls, because Zion is just an incredibly interesting case of it. In the specific case of Zion, he was the NBA's poster boy for a while and the media's poster boy for a while, but the one issue with that is that because of Zion's unavailability, he was only played 50 games so far in his career through 2 seasons. That's kind of an unreliable poster boy. You can't consistently get highlights or build hype out of a guy who is missing over half of his games. And even more importantly than that, he had a replacement show up this year with LaMelo Ball. You know that meme from Toy Story, "I don't want to play with you anymore"? Yeah, well, that was Bleacher Report with Zion once LaMelo turned up. They didn't need to rely on Zion anymore. Zion had a dunk? Well, I mean, LaMelo threw a lob to Miles Bridges. I think we've already got our highlight quota. Another part of this is that I think Zion has just simply produced less highlights this year than last year, if that makes sense. Like, because he's a bit heftier these days, while it hasn't affected his stats, I will say his athleticism doesn't look quite the same. These days, he's more inclined to put up a layup when what 2 years ago would have been a dunk likely. But as for Samaso's straight up X's and O's basketball reasons, the Pelicans in Zion's rookie year were 3rd in the NBA in pace. This year they are in the bottom 10. So less fast break opportunities, more scoring in the half court, which means less dunk opportunities, which means less highlights. So as for why Zion's hype died, well, he created less highlights and the NBA found a new young golden boy to replace him with. It seems like NBA fans pick a new young player every year to absolutely adore, and Zion was quickly kicked out of that spot once LaMelo came around. But the thing is, this is not the first time this has happened. It's probably the most extreme example, or at the very least the most extreme example in recent memory, but hype just completely disappearing for a player previously hyped to hell is not new. It's very common for a player to ride the wave of hype, and then suddenly the water drops from out under them, and then they just fall on their ass. Don't know where that metaphor is going, but you get my point. And I just want to know, why does this happen? Well, you've seen me mention Bleacher Report a couple of times here, and that's for good reason. The media plays a huge part in hype building around players and falling out from under players. As crazy popular as Zion became in high school, if the media never talked about him, you likely would have never heard of him. Even if you heard of him from someone else, that person likely heard of him from the media or someone else who heard from the media. They influence who the big names are quite a bit, and the nature of the media is to find the newest thing. Zion Williamson, well, we've talked about him for a couple of years now. He's old news. It's LaMelo time. Andrew Wiggins, who my last deep dive was about. B-Souls made a video on him potentially being a bust back in 2018, and when I saw that video pop up in my sub box, my initial reaction was, what? Wiggins a bust? I mean, I just looked up his stats, and I mean, he averaged 23 points per game in his 3rd year, but then I realized watching that video from B-Souls that everything he was saying was correct. I had just not really paid much attention to Andrew Wiggins in a couple of years because it was 2018 to that point, and I was focused on like Jason Tatum or somebody else. I hadn't thought about Wiggins in a while, despite the fact that he was only like 23 years old, because the hype train just continued chugging on forward and my mind was on some other young player. The constant cycle of the media keeps the hype train going from station to station, and while it's possible to focus on more than one guy, obviously Bleacher Report hasn't stopped posting about Zion in total, there is always a clear favorite, and that matters. It's the media's nature to look for the next big thing, and it's human nature to follow that trend. But now let's have a discussion about hype, whether or not you should really hype players to begin with, and more importantly, should we hold these players to certain standards based on that hype? So for the first part of that conversation, whether or not you should build hype for things, well, I don't think it's really possible not to. Hype, good or bad, is kind of impossible to avoid. I mean, I'm sorry, but if I see a 6'6", 280-pound kid with a 45-inch vertical dunk a bunch of poor 5'4" white kids into a new dimension, I mean, that shit's gonna get me hyped. What do you want from me? The problem with that, though, is that it builds expectations, which, when not met, kills your appreciation of it. Where if you had just never had those expectations to begin with, you likely would have appreciated every element of it because there was no room to be let down. Like, let's look at an example of hype outside of sports. Art. Recently, one of my favorite YouTubers, Nathan Zed, made a video on how hype is kind of bad for art, how it kills art. In that video, he said this.
Every anticipated product goes through the circle of hype. First, this person or company was sent from God. They had descended from heaven to give us this movie or book or freaking album or game. And then they don't deliver. And it's like, you demon child. Burn them at the stake. The things I end up loving the most are the ones I know nothing about. The things I enjoy the most are the ones I had zero expectations for. Going in completely blind and appreciating it for what it is instead of what I thought it could be or would be or wanted it to be.
And that's completely true, right? Like, I think we can all think of an example of where we were really hyped up for something and then it failed to reach those expectations when those expectations were probably a tad unrealistic because of that hype. Like, the example of that for me has to be The Last of Us Part 2. The first Last of Us game is my favorite game of all time, not even close. And it's probably the most impactful piece of art that I have ever consumed. I've played it a dozen times. I take away something new every time. That game came out when I was 13 years old, and it was very formative to who I became today. So naturally, when the sequel comes out 8 years later, I was pretty fucking hyped for it. So when I finally got my hands on the game, and I didn't really like it, dude, I was fucking heartbroken. But I have to wonder, if I didn't have this expectation, if let's say I became a Last of Us fan in 2020 and then played the first game and then, oh look, the Part 2 is already out, what would my experience have been? Would I have been that upset with The Last of Us Part 2? Because I don't think I would have been. By the off chance you would like to hear me talk more about The Last of Us Part 2, I did a video essay on it that's about 45 minutes long over on my second channel. That will be in the card right there. It should be right there, unless I forgot, in which case, shit. So to say hype can be bad from the perspective of a fan would be an understatement. This, of course, applies to basketball as well. I really bought into Wiggins as the next Kobe when I was like 14, so when he didn't become that, I was disappointed to the point where I did hold that against Wiggins. Because, like, dude, you kind of let me down. Right or wrong, I held it against Wiggins that he didn't become the next Kobe because I just had that hype built up. Right or wrong, I fucking hate Neil Druckmann for The Last of Us Part 2. I don't give a shit that he made The Last of Us Part 1. That's old news. I hate you, Neil Druckmann. I don't care. But as bad as hype can be, even from a fan's perspective, like I said earlier, it's really unavoidable. What we can do our best to do, however, is manage those expectations. Make sure they do not reach a point where they are unrealistic. Let's take it back to last week with Andrew Wiggins, who I did my most recent deep dive on. I wanted to have a conversation around hype and the effect that had on Andrew's career in that video, but I knew I was making this video, so I had to delay that conversation until now. But let's have it. Many of the people who argue Wiggins isn't a bust make the point that Wiggins should have never had the expectations that he did to begin with. So him failing to live up to said expectations should not be held against him, which I believe to be a completely valid point. I mean, as Nathan said, if you set your expectations really high, they're obviously not going to be met. And especially setting these expectations on literal kids, like Andrew Wiggins was a minor when this hype was being built. Zion Williamson was a minor when this hype was being built. It's a little bit questionable. Like, I don't think it's morally wrong, but it's definitely something to consider. But I also don't think that building hype is necessarily unfair if that hype is kept in check. I mean, Wiggins did have incredible potential. You shouldn't be mad at him for not living up to it, but I do think it's fair to be disappointed by it. And I also think it's fair to label a player a bust based on set expectations. If a player falls very short of their expectations, then I'm sorry, they're a bust in my eyes. But at the same time, I don't know how fair it is to set those expectations to begin with. It's tricky, and I wish I had a clear answer to make this video be wrapped up with a nice little bow, but I just don't. All I can say confidently is do not be antagonistic towards players for not living up to your expectations. Just remember it's fucking basketball, dude. Just in general, don't be antagonistic towards NBA players unless that NBA player is, say, Karl Malone, in which case, fuck Karl Malone, antagonize him all you want. So what did we learn here? Well, hype is volatile, and yes, I did look up the definition of volatile to make sure that I was using the right word. Easily evaporated at normal temperatures. That can't be it. Liable to change unexpectedly and rapidly, often for the worse. Okay, see, that's what I'm talking about. Basically, hype is a nightmare that nobody benefits from except for me after making this video. All I know for sure is just don't be a dick. I mean, it's basketball at the end of the day. Chill out. This video was posted a day early over on my Patreon, so if you would like to get these videos earlier every week, then go support me over there. It means the world and it helps you support content that you enjoy and you get content earlier. But if you cannot do that, I would also just appreciate a like and subscription. So do that. But yeah, that's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.